Chapter 7 Sunhee. It wasn't fair. Why couldn't girls ride bicycles? It wasn't like the old days when girls had to wear long skirts. Amani still wore long skirts, and so did a lot of older women. But young women and girls like me wore trousers. Amani had told me it was the Japanese who had brought in this style. A lot of people hadn't liked it, but I couldn't understand why. Trousers were much easier to wear and better for playing in. I could have ridden a bicycle. It didn't look that hard. Taeyul fell off a few times when he was first learning, but it wasn't long before he was able to wobble around the outer courtyard and then up and down the lane. By the third day, he was so good at it that he took off to ride around town, and I couldn't even watch him anymore. When I turned to walk back up the path to the house, I stumbled on a little stone and twisted my ankle. I crouched down and rubbed the sore spot, then stood up and kicked the stone with my other foot as hard as I could. The stone went skipping down the path. I watched it until it slowed down and finally rolled to a stop. Not like Taeyul on the bicycle. He wasn't very good at stopping. He always slammed on the brakes and fell off. I went in to help Amani with dinner. Abuji was listening to the radio. He and Uncle listened a lot these days. There was a war in Europe and a lot of news about a German leader named Hitler. It didn't really interest me, a strange sounding name from a place I knew little about. When I heard it was just war news on the radio again, I went into the kitchen. It was my job to prepare the rice every evening. I looked in the rice barrel, empty. I was finding it empty more and more often these days. It was because of the war, but not the one in Europe, the one in Manchuria. Japan was at war there, fighting against the Chinese. This was why they'd taken over Korea in the first place. It was only one step from the northern border of Korea into Manchuria. The Japanese army always needed supplies. For years, they'd taken part of every rice crop to send to the troops in Manchuria or to ship to Japan. Sometimes there was no rice in the marketplace. Other times it was very expensive. To make it last longer, Amani had started mixing it with barley. Barley was cheaper than rice. We thought of it as food for poor people. It was chewier and coarser and had a strong flavor. Neither Taeyul nor I liked barley. We used to pick out the brownish grains and eat only the rice. But soon there was more barley than rice in our bowls. We couldn't pick it out anymore. There would have been hardly anything left to eat. I guess you could say we got used to it. But there were still times when I missed having a whole bowl of pure white rice. It seemed we'd be having only barley tonight. I picked up the barley bag and was startled by how light it was. There wasn't enough for a meal. "어머니," I started to ask. "Here," she said, handing me another bag. I opened it and looked inside. It was millet. Little round yellow grains that farmers used as chicken feed. Startled, I looked up at Amani again, and she nodded reassuringly. "It's quite nutritious," she said. "Who knows, perhaps it will even make a nice change." I said nothing. I could hardly believe we were cooking animal food for our dinner. As usual, I served Abuji, Uncle, and Taeyul their food first. Taeyul took one look at the yellow grains in his bowl and said, "어머니, what's this?" It was very rude of him to comment on the food at all, and even ruder to ask such a question of Amani. Abuji looked at him sternly. It was Uncle who answered. "That's millet, nephew. Come, now, chickens and pigs love it, so I'm sure it will be good for you too." Uncle smiled at Taeyul and took a big bite. "Your mother is such a good cook. She can make even millet taste delicious." Now, then, Eat when you are eating. Talk when you are finished. That was one of our traditional sayings. It was good manners to pay full attention to your meal. Uncle's words had been said in his usual cheerful, joking manner, but there was a hint of a warning behind them. I heard it, and I knew Tail did too, for he ate his dinner without another word. Millet had a grassy taste and felt awful in my mouth, half mushy, half crunchy. I never got used to it, even though we had it nearly every day from then on. The bowls of yellow grain made me long for rice even more. But Amani always made our meals taste better by cooking lots of vegetables, squash, sweet potatoes, cucumbers. She was a skilled gardener, and the vegetable patch flourished no matter what the weather. I liked helping her prepare the bed, chopping and crumbling the dirt until it was like silk between my fingers, then planting the seeds or seedlings in nice straight rows and giving each of them a drink. And later in the year, I loved it when she'd tell me to run out to the garden and gather vegetables for our dinner. But I hated weeding and often found an excuse to be doing something else when Amani went out to weed. Along the back of the vegetable patch was a row of small trees. Really, they were more like large shrubs. In the summer, they blossomed, big pink, or white-petaled flowers with magenta throats. They were rows of Sharon trees, the national tree of Korea. Amani had planted them years before, when she and Abaji had first moved to this house. One evening in the fall, Uncle brought home more news. The government had issued another official order. All families who had cherry trees were to dig up shoots and saplings from around their trees and bring them to police headquarters. The little cherry trees were to be planted all over town, and everyone was supposed to take good care of them. The government order spoke of wishing to make our land more beautiful with thousands of cherry trees, but it wasn't just a wish for beauty. The cherry tree was the national symbol of Japan. And the final part of the order was that all rows of Sharon trees had to be uprooted and burned. The military police would be inspecting gardens to see that the order had been followed. Amani stayed inside the house. She couldn't bear to watch as Taeyul chopped down the rows of Sharon trees one by one and dug out their roots. It was a difficult job. The trees were old and their roots reached deep into the ground. I helped him by dragging the fallen trees to a corner of the yard, where they'd be burned later. Taeyul had reached the last tree, a small one that Amani had planted only a few years before. As he began to dig, Amani came out of the house and said, "Taeyul, wait! First, go fetch a big pot, or a basin or something." "What kind of pot?" "I don't know. It needs to be big." "Oh, wait. Where you keep the tools, there's an old ceramic pot with a crack in it. That will do." I helped Taeyul carry the pot out to her. It was quite large around as my two arms could make a circle. "Now," Amani said, pointing to the last little tree, "dig in a circle, and be careful not to cut any of the roots. I want you to bring the whole root ball out of the ground." This took a long time. Taeyul had used an axe to chop up the roots of the other trees and make it easier to dig them out. Now he could only use a shovel. Amani returned to the house, but she came out from time to time to watch him work. At last, he put down the shovel and wiped his brow. "I think I can get it out now," he said. Although it had been the smallest tree, it was nearly as tall as me. Taeyul pulled it carefully out of the hole and laid it down on the ground. "Amani," I called. She came out again and patted Taeyul's shoulder. "You did a good job," she said. She walked around the little tree. "I think you will need to cut off about this much." She pointed to a spot about a third of the way down from the top. while Tail chopped away with the axe. Amani took up the shovel and began to fill the ceramic pot with dirt from where the trees had been dug up. Now I knew what she was doing. I got a trowel from the tool shelf and helped scoop dirt into the pot. Amani and Tail lifted the little tree and settled it into the pot. Then we packed more dirt and mulch around it. Finally, I fetched the basin of water and gave the tree a drink. The three of us stepped back and looked at the tree and then at each other. We were tired and dirty, but we managed to smile. We'd hardly spoken throughout the entire task, yet we'd all known what to do. It felt good to have done this together. All the same, I was troubled. Amani was breaking the law. If she got caught, if the guards discovered the little tree, what would happen? Would she be arrested? A cold wind blew through me. I was afraid for her, but I was proud of her too. How could I be proud of my mother for breaking the law? I shook my head, trying to clear it of these confusing thoughts, and looked at Amani again. She was watching as Tail lifted the heavy pot onto an old burlap sack. There was something in her face I hadn't seen before. I didn't often think about what my parents looked like. They looked like my parents, that's all. But sometimes when she was sitting calmly, sewing in the pale light near a window, I could see that Amani was pretty. Her face was more round than oval, but she had lovely clear skin. She wore her long hair braided and coiled in a neat bun at the nape of her neck. Sometimes at night, when she took it down, she let me brush it. I loved doing that. My own hair had been cut short, chin length with bangs, when I started school because that was the required hairstyle. Each of Amani's eyelids had a delicate fold in it. This was unusual, and it was considered a trait of luck and beauty. My eyelids had folds too because of them, and maybe because I was a girl, I thought I looked more like Amani than Abaji. Tail was just like Abaji, both of them tall and thin. Now, Amani had a firm expression on her face, almost stubborn. Maybe she was afraid too, but she wasn't letting it show. Tail dragged the sack and pot across the garden to the house. He paused and looked around, then put the tree in its pot near the tool shelves. "There's plenty of stuff here," he said. "If we need to, we can put things over the tree to hide it." I looked around anxiously and saw a few old sacks in the corner. I picked them up and draped them carefully over the tree. Tail took a rotten straw basket and some pieces of wood and leaned them against the pot. It was a good disguise. The tree now looked like a pile of old junk. "Good," Amani said and smiled at both of us. Later that afternoon, the soldiers came around to inspect our yard. I was weeding in the vegetable garden and held my breath as they walked around. For a few minutes, they stood and watched Tail at work burning a huge pile of rows of Sharon trees. Then they nodded at each other and marched off. I let out my breath in a whoosh. The little tree in its pot amid the workshop clutter was safe. Amani took even better care of the little tree than she did the garden. Once I heard her murmuring quietly as she pruned it when she thought no one was around. "The time will come," she said to the tree, "when you will be free to grow in a place of honor. I will see that you live until then. That is a promise." Truly, rows of Sharon trees are not as beautiful as cherry trees. But if that little tree were ever planted outside again, I knew it would be the most beautiful tree in the world.